saying is capitalism is not just the primitive accumulation that Marx spoke about. It is you want to be better than the other person who is a capitalist. So it's a kind of one-upmanship among capitalists. So the entire endeavor of economic activity, of market forces, should be to fulfill this imitative capitalist ardor or aspiration. Entire generations of, or entire sections, demographics of population are left out in the cold of this process. Imagine a world which is converted into a competition among the billionaires and creating and acquiring and sustaining markets to sustain that competition. That is what we are into today. It is, in some sense, the Marxist idea of commodity fetishism, but it's far more than that. It's a newfangled idea. And this has to be fought. And the people who are seeing it in front of their eyes are fighting it. There may be some things we disagree with. A young mayoral candidate in New York called Zohran Mamdani. But when he speaks the language of the common man, and when he wins the mayoral primary candidacy for the Democratic Party, the President of the United States calls him a lunatic communist. This is how they view anything which is not of the far right. Anything on the left is stigmatized. Anything on the left which is democratic, which is socialist, which speaks in terms of inclusion, is stigmatized. That is the larger world picture. Here in India, we have a mirror image of that. Under the BJP government, where the RSS agenda is being fulfilled methodically, day after day, month after month, year after year. We have seen how they tried to gut our universities. We have seen what happened to Jawaharlal Nehru University and other universities. There's a direct aggrandizement of these universities, and yet, election after student union, election after election, the left bounces back to power in JNU and they don't know what to do about it. Because the youth see the truth. Youth see the value of truth. They cannot be misled, they cannot be derailed, they cannot be, led away from the core values which they believe in. In addition to this frontal attack of universities, they use constitutional positions, including that of the gubernatorial positions, the governors of various states, to be the cat's paw, to shall we say, literally castrate the universities, to create a new educational system which talks about obscurantism, which looks for values in mythology, not even in history. And when there is a resistance to this, those people will be called lunatic communists. So there is a combination of these forces, a dangerous collusion of these forces internationally and in the context of India today, even in India. And when it comes to fighting this, the left plays a very crucial role. As you know, India Bloc was India Bloc not because the left has a big presence, but because it has the integrity, it has the credibility. Comrade Sitaram Yechuri, as we know, played a crucial role in the formation of the India Bloc to fight the BJP RSS forces. And after him, you can already see that it is in tatters. Why does this happen? It happens because of the credibility, the principled stand of a party, of a movement, of the allied fronts that carry this whole ideology forward. We are not in a post-ideological phase. We are. You need to be even more ideology. The solution to the current problem is not abstinence from ideology, as unfortunately a section of the youth seem to be thinking. They are beginning to become apolitical or anti-political which is what the status quo wants. This is what the BJP RSS kind of ruling establishment wants. Because they want people who will just listen to what they say. They want herds who will just be mobilized and become street fighters. We are seeing that, the lawlessness. If you want to show a film in India today, it's not enough to get a censor certificate. You must make sure that the street gangs don't pillage the theatres, that they allow the film to run. Constitutional machineries, establishments are being destroyed, are collapsing. We are seeing a conflation of the idea of the state and the person. We see that happening in the US, we see that happening in India. I am the state, as Louis XIV would say. We see a collusion or a conflation happening when it comes to West Asia, when it comes to Palestinian rights, where you conflate artificially, deliberately, mischievously, anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. Zionism is a poisonous, dangerous ideology, and any rational person will oppose it. But if you today oppose Zionism, they'll say you're an anti-Semite, you're an anti-Jew. This is a conflation deliberately brought about. In India, the counterpart is a conflation of Hinduism and Hindutva. Hinduism is a religion, and in a free country like India, we practice. There are lots of Hindus. Some of us are Hindus by name, by birth, may not be practicing Hindus. But Hindutva is the equivalent of Zionism. It is the acute, poisonous construct out of Hinduism. But today, if you oppose Hindutva, you are called anti-Hindu. And immediately you are associated with minority, with Islam, and Islam per se is seen as anti-national. There's a whole mythology, a whole dangerous mythology being created by a party and by this political front called the RSS, or the cultural nationalist front called the RSS, which is dabbling in our culture, in our ancient traditions, selectively, and creating a new poisonous India. The SFI and allied organizations are the only ones who can fight this determinedly, with tenacity. Otherwise, we will have a divided nation. Already we are a polarized nation. We are polarized culturally, we are polarized politically, we are polarized societally. And just to illustrate why Hinduism and Hindutva conflation is so dangerous, you cannot find a greater Hindu than Mahatma Gandhi. He believed in Hinduism, but he was against Hindutva. Read his latest, the book by Krishna Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi's grandson. It's called I Am a Mahatma Gandhi, I Am an Ordinary Indian. That's the title of the book. It is for the first time publication of Gandhiji's writings in Gujarati, which were not published in his collected works before, where he talks about the difference between Hindutva and Hinduism, not in as many words, where he opposes Sanatanism. He calls those who are for untouchability, those who do not allow particular castes into temples, those who are other lower castes, not lowered castes, there is no lower caste, we lower them, lowered castes. He calls those who do that Sanatanists. He doesn't call them Hindus. And he says Sanatanists are against Hinduism. In Kerala, he came and had a big argument with the upper caste Nambudris here, where he argued for temple, integration, for re-entry, for all castes. And that's all reflected in these books. I would urge that you should read it. Because this is a Hindu, the personification of Hindu, the quintessential Hindu, political Hindu of the century, or of the last century, speaking, writing about what he thinks about Sanatanis. But today, if you say anything against Sanatana, you will immediately be seen as anti-Hindu. And you will be persecuted on social media or physically. So this is the kind of conflations that are taking place. And we must recognize this. Organizations like the SFI, I'm sure, will recognize this and tackle this in the way it should be tackled. There are two aspects to, I think, the philosophy of the left that I would like to draw your attention to, which I think are very relevant today. One is the aspect of culture, which traditionally we may not have given equal importance in the left ideologies, because the Marxist ideology, as we know, is based on economic centrism. In the sense, the economic is central to Marxist ideology. Sometime back, we know that academically there was a discussion on caste needing to be reconsidered. Initially, we had a simplistic synonymity, a simplistic conflation of caste and class. And that was addressed by the party, addressed by the thinkers in the party, by the ideologues. And today there is an understanding of caste as something distinctive, although it could belong to the larger context of class. Similarly, we have to redefine, relook at the concept of culture, because the enemy is using culture. The enemy is using culture day in and day out, using culture as identity, using culture as identity mark. In the Marxist tradition, we have an idea of superstructure and base. And the base is seen as economic and superstructure would be seen as culture. Some extreme thinking on Marxist I think culture is even false consciousness. But there are Marxists like Raymond Williams who have argued that in the new order, we need to consider culture as important as the economic determined base. Because culture is part of identity. And when we have moved into the post-Cold War situation, there are some people who argue that we have moved from an era of ideology to an era of identity. That identity has become very important in the current realm of ideology, which may or may not be true, but we see palpably before us the cultural argument, the cultural identity raising its head, and to counter that, we need to be able to know that culture and oppose that culture. The other important thing, I think, for the youth of this country is to know the importance of digital culture and digital social media. We know that the winners in the world, those who are spreading misinformation, disinformation, false news, untruth, are doing it using social media. Modi has his own social media. He doesn't give press conferences anymore. Trump has his own social media. Paradoxically, it's called Truth Social. Now, nothing truthful about it, but it's called Truth Social. I think he had a complex about it. That's why he called it Truth Social. Because he knew he was going to say untruth after untruth on that platform. So the importance of social media must be driven home. And digital media. In fact, Raymond Williams says we should not have a hoary idea of culture, the old, grand old culture, because that is what these antiquated forces are using. For everything, go back to mythology. The surgery existed in the Vedic times, that there were aeroplanes in the early. You have heard all those silly arguments. We need instead an idea of culture that is living and everyday, what you call quotidian culture, as Raymond Williams says. Culture is in the everyday, in our habits, in our behaviors, in the way we interact, in our expressions, in our songs, in our poems, in our protests, in our lives. So demystify the idea of culture, but deal with culture. We cannot run away from culture. Demystify it and question the values that these so-called cultural ambassadors are putting before us. I think once we have mastered the social media, I'm sure SFI and organizations like that are active in social media, but the opposition is so overwhelming in that area, so dominant in that area, that they are able to peddle a lot of untruth, a lot of nonsense. The famous philosopher Nietzsche said something which came true in the 1930s Germany of Nazis. He said the history of truth is the history of the longest lasting falsehood. In other words, the history of truth is the history of the longest lasting falsehood. In other words, the history of lies. If you say a lie once, nobody believes you. Say it twice, thrice, 4 times. People begin to wonder, maybe this is true, that is not true. So this is the way social media is being used. The RSS BJP combine, and we must counter that. We have to point out that this is the truth of life. This is the truth of the deprived. This is the truth of people who do not have wages, do not have a job. This is the truth of discrimination. This is the truth of exclusion. This is the truth of female infanticide, of bonded labor, of gender injustice. You look around us, it's all unequal. All a question of expression, of suppression, exploitation. So those are the truths that must be countering the kind of the new normal truths that the BJP RSS tries to put out. So I'm sure that with these few words, I do not want to give spend a longer time here because there's a big agenda ahead of you. My good friend Raina is to speak. I would say that if we can wed ourselves to the idea of looking at truth as we know it, not as it is peddled by social media, especially by the righteous forces, not even unfortunately as it is, may not be consciously peddled, but as it is reflected automatically in the mainstream media, because the mainstream media just picks up the lead from those in power, partly because they think it's easier to do it, partly because they are under threat, under direct or indirect threat. There are all kinds of forces operating on them. So you cannot unfortunately believe what you read, what you see in television, what you hear on in podcasts. You cannot take it at face value. You have to interrogate, you have to question. And you as SFI are best placed to become that filter which will call out the untruth, which will call out the falsities, which will call out the misinformation and disinformation and provide an alternative narrative. And therefore, I conclude partly in deference to our guests from West Bengal with a quotation from Thakur, Rabindranath Thakur, who wrote this in 1930s, even before independence, about what the India he envisages would be. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world is not broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my father, let my country awake. La Salam, Jai Hind.
Comrade M.K. Aina with us. We know he is an actor, director, and a theatre artist. For us, moreover that he is a comrade of Comrade Safdar Hashmi, and he is one of the founder of Safdar Hashmi Memorial Trust, Ahmad. So I am proudly invite Comrade M.K. Aina to deliver his inaugural speech.
Thank you, SFR, for inviting me to be in this wonderful conference here. I congratulate you when I saw you in the streets of Delhi, protesting, facing police, recently when you were demonstrating against the plight of the Gaza and the Palestine. And that was a wake-up call for a lot of people in Delhi. Because people in Delhi think now it's not possible to protest. Space has been taken over already by the right and they dominate it. But there is a saying Fidel Castro happened today in India is about ideas. We have on the one side medieval ideas, day in and day out, churn on media, leaders, parliament, wherever they are, every day. But we need to understand why they are doing it. Many years back, a friend of mine in Nepal gifted me a map, beautifully printed digital map of India. But what was unique, what he had done, was he had printed it upside down. So you had Kerala on the top and Kashmir at the bottom. I said, what is this? Why have you done it? He said, you know, you Indians think that you have a head, Kashmir, you have 2 arms and your feet, you are a perfect nation. This map tells you how you are surrounded with the people who are, and time will come and you will wake up what that means. When I was asked to come here, I really looked at that map, it is still with me. I said, what a prophetic thing that Nepal doesn't like us, Bangladesh doesn't like us, Sri Lanka has problems, Pakistan has problems. What have you done with the nation? What has happened to the nation? See, I'm from culture. I was at the National School of Drama. Students used to come from Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan. For decades now, no students come from there. Why has it happened? I remember when there was a government in Afghanistan, there were 500 students coming to learn, educate themselves in India, because India was offering them 500 scholarships. Every university you will see them. And that was kind of a relationship we were building to soft power. Today, nobody is coming. Why is it happening? Is it because there was less resistance? Was there that we didn't wake up what was happening? We knew that it's left new, that has been working. And I'm a storyteller. I always will tell you about true stories. The Nepal story is one wake-up call for all of us. Because today, it's China coming to Bangladesh, it's China coming to Nepal, it's coming to Pakistan. And what is it, my government? They asked me a question, Mr. Prime Minister. You did a 100 crore project when you brought the chairman of China to Gujarat. You remember those scenes on the television? He was on a chula, he was given the great reception where the river bed was. What happened? Why did it happen? What is happening today? So it requires not my observation is to the youth of India, which needs direction. I will be switching between Hindi and Urdu because I've been asked. There are a lot of people from Hindi area here. ब्रेक की एक पोएम है, घर तुम जिंदा हो कभी ना कहो कभी नहीं. If you are alive, never say never. जो कुछ निश्चित है निश्चित नहीं है. What's final is not final. जैसे जो कुछ है वैसे नहीं रहेगा. The conditions that are there will not remain as they are. किसकी हिम्मत है जो कहे कभी नहीं. Remember, particularly as a fighter, you should remember what is impossible is possible. That is what